Sí. De res.
Okay, so let's just start now. Well, just before introducing Professor Matteo Fermeglia, just let me welcome everybody here in the classroom. Let me just also welcome those people who are just following us on the Zoom session. We are recording that session, so for those who are online, if you do not want to be recorded when you contribute or if you have any question, whatever, just please put your camera off and that would be all. And if you want to ask anything for those still who are on the Zoom, please use the sign with the hand raised and we will just welcome your contribution. So also for our students and for the audience here, the idea is that I will first introduce Professor Fermeglia. He will teach at a seminar for around 45 minutes, and then we will open the debate, and then we will welcome any questions or any comments. Let me just introduce you, Professor Fermeglia. I think it's a great story. I'm sorry, yes, no. I think you are really lucky to have him with us this afternoon. We have to be very, very grateful that he has traveled from Belgium, where he's teaching in Hasselt University, and just to share this couple of hours with us today here in Barcelona. So as I think there is some kind of, coping, sorry about that. So Professor Fermeglia, he's a professor at the University of Hasselt in Belgium. He's professor in environmental and administrative law. He has been also a visiting professor at Columbia Law School, where he has been working with and collaborating with the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law, which is kind of a reference for all the people who is working on climate change, because it's where you can find most of the information and in issues on litigation, climate litigation and everything. He has also been awarded with the Raúl Estrada Oyela Award for Emerging Scholar in Climate Law. And in his work as a researcher, as a professor, he has distinguished himself with all these areas related to climate change, and in particular, all these areas of, well, decarbonization, new initiative, new technologies, cross-cutting issues, litigation. He actually has covered most of the different elements or different issues concerning a climate change area. And of course, as a result of all that job and a result of all that research, he has a lot of different publications. I don't want to mention right now each one, but he has several books. He has several chapters in collective books. He has articles in specialized journals. So I think all of that is just a small, give you a small idea, no, on how all his experience in this area has been. And as I said, I think that to close this series of 3 seminars that we had with the Monnet chair on climate change, decarbonization, the role of the different actors, etc. I think it's a perfect close of the perfect closer of this series of seminars. So this is what I just wanted to say. I would like to thank you very much again for joining us this afternoon. So I'm giving you the floor, and we are going to first to share the screen.
Yes,
yeah.
Let's share this. I think the screen is already shared, isn't it?
Yes.
I think if you just go.
No, I have to, no, because I just stopped to share the screen. Okay, I see. Yeah. So that's
Then we can go full screen.
yes. Let me see. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah.
That's it. Okay.
Yes, that's it.
Maybe
Okay.
you can
Yeah, I
turn
have to. Sorry, there is someone I cannot see here.
Okay.
Just show that.
Okay, thanks a lot for a kind introduction, which paints a picture of me, which is overwhelming. Good afternoon, everybody. Buenos días. It is a pleasure to be here, especially after 2 years not traveling around and not seeing so many faces in person. And again, it is a pleasure for me to drive you through the topic that together we decided to discuss today. By the way, this is Hasselt University, which is an all-prison campus. I promised a picture and I showing you that. This is Flanders, Belgium. This is literally a prison, which is also running on solar panels, which is going to be one of the topic of today. Before we start with the real topics and real contents, I would like to just ask you one thing. How many of you use electricity every day? You don't use it. Everyone. Well, it might make sense even not to use it. How many of you generate electricity every day? Produce electricity? One? Just one. Maybe the young lady joining, she is generating electricity. But you see, this is exactly the point I want to address today. All in my backyard. The thing about shifting, the topic of today is the discussion about shifting electricity generation, most electricity generation, from what is the traditional model, which is normally centralized. You buy electricity from the grid, from a central producer, you name it, to a decentralized one, where you can actually get generation of electricity in your very backyard. This is the problem we are addressing here. And what I would like to also to explain briefly is how this is dealt with, especially in the context of Southern Europe. This is very important from several perspectives. And I will try to address this in the very first part of the presentation. And then I will turn to, if this lets me do it, yep. I will turn to the actual policy and regulatory background for that in the European Union. And then again, zooming in on Southern Europe, especially. So again, as a first point, I would like to explain 4 reasons why we should first, of course, decarbonize the economy, which is quite straightforward, but also why we should decentralize energy generation. You have heard a lot of talks about reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector, right? But this is one game. Another game is to, as I mentioned, completely shift the paradigm that we have adopted in Europe, not only in Europe, about how we produce electricity. Then I would like to have a critical point on that. So I would like to stress what are the benefits and drawbacks that come with this shift. It is not all gold what glitters, and this is also the case for decentralized energy generation. And I will give you also an example for that. And then again, I will try to solve over what is the policy background in the EU, and the legislation in Southern Europe, also in Spain, probably, if you have time. So first of all, 4 reasons why. The first reason why we should decarbonize and decentralize energy generation is this. You see, this is the demand for energy in 2010 globally. This is 17 terawatt hours, more or less 15, well, a lot of watt hours. This is what we need to run our planet in 2010. And we can hardly cope with that, with our current energy system. But this is what we will need in 36 years' time, more or less the double. So first point that you want to probably stick in your mind is that we need a lot of energy if we want to keep up with the pace of growth that we are enjoying in Western countries, but as well as in developing countries. So how do we do that? Well, here again is the breakdown of CO2 emissions, because of course we want to do that. We reduce, well, by reducing CO2 emissions, right? So I just want to highlight this part here, which is about Europe and more specifically the EU. Of course, we are focusing on the EU here, but of course, you will see in the following slide that this trend, which is going upwards, of course, in terms of consumption of energy, and therefore also in CO2 emissions in Europe, has to take a very steep curve down. So this part, which relates to EU 28, back then, well, 27 now, this has to take a radical shift downwards. But at the same time, we need to remember that 38 terawatt hours, which is global, but of course broken down in different continents. So first reason, we need more energy. Second reason, we need to decarbonize the way in which we produce that energy. Third reason, well, again, well, the same reason actually, we need to look at where we want to decarbonize. This is the breakdown of where the CO2 emissions come from, essentially globally. But again, the breakdown can be the same pretty much everywhere, especially in developed countries. You can see that energy use in buildings still amounts for roughly 18% of total CO2 emissions from the energy sector. This has been, of course, recognized by the European Commission, and we'll see that later. But my point here is that this part of the cake, this piece of the cake, is very much important. This is where we want to hit, alongside other things, of course, if we want to achieve decarbonization of the energy sector. But again, with the aim of keeping up with the level of production of energy, of generation of energy that we need to support our, well, our lifestyle, essentially, yeah? Our production, our society. So remember these numbers because, well, these are quite important and sometimes they are striking. Yeah? You would not think that energy use in buildings account for such an amount of CO2 emissions. And against this is the trajectory that the EU has adopted as a target for 2050 and from 2030 about reducing greenhouse gases emissions. So you have to take that cake that I showed you, which is again a global picture, but can be somehow replicated also in the EU, within the EU. And you have to look at the very steep trajectory that we need to take according to what the EU policy says. So this is the European Commission telling us, as industries, as citizens, look, this is where we want to go in terms of reducing greenhouse gases emissions. And you can see how steep this curve goes from 2030, especially from 2030 onwards, but still also up to 2030. You all know probably that now we have, well, the EU has adopted a minus 55% greenhouse gases emissions concentration target by 2030, which is rather ambitious. And to do that, of course, it has to hit on several respects, including the building sector, which again accounted for roughly 20% of greenhouse gases emissions. So this is to show that the challenge there is massive. And the point of today's talk is that it is not only going to be achieved by top-down solutions, decarbonizing energy production from above, but also from the bottom. And there are win-win situations related to that, related to decarbonizing the building sector, and also, of course, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from from the bottom side, or let's say from the demand side, not necessarily from the supply side. This is again a little bit of breakdown again about the EU in particular. So I wanted to show you these two cake diagrams. On the left-hand side, you have the energy consumption, which is not necessarily only electricity, of course, from the EU. And you see again, households, so your very house, accounts for 28% of energy consumption in the EU. And at the same time, you see also the breakdown of energy generation in the EU. This is 2019, if I'm not mistaken, but still the picture doesn't change very much. You still have quite a good share of renewable energy. By renewable energy, of course, we mean wind, solar PV, photovoltaics, which is going to be the topic of basically of this talk, mostly hydropower, geothermal power, and then, well, you might have some very creative things like tidal power and stuff like that, but it's mostly about wind, solar PV, and hydropower. And then you have, of course, nuclear energy. You have natural gas, quite in the news recently, right? Crude oil, still accounting for quite a lot of the energy we actually consume, right? So this cake there really much accounts for this cake here. And this is again a point about the point I made about reducing demand and reducing supply. If you reduce demand from households, you might be hitting also on this energy mix here. Of course, with the aim to enhance, to increase the share of renewable energy. So this is the challenge that we have ahead. Second reason. Third reason, and then I zoom into the Mediterranean region. This is the climate risk index. This is made by German Watch, but it's based on IPCC's findings, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change findings. You can see that in terms of risk of being exposed to extreme weather events, consequences of climate change, the Mediterranean region is quite spot on, right? It is not that reddish as other regions, but still, if you look at the whole Europe, it is quite what is usually called a hotspot, a climate hotspot. This means that if we can get some specific consequences of climate change in terms, for example, of extreme weather events, more heavy precipitations, droughts, floods, this is going to happen more specifically and more intensively in the Mediterranean region. So you see that on the one hand, we also need to protect ourselves from climate change. As Mediterraneans, I'm speaking as an Italian, of course. I would be rather safe in Belgium, maybe, but yeah, I still attach to my country. So, and this is also an even more recent account, pretty much the same graph, but taken from the last IPCC report. IPCC is the most recognized, solid scientific body doing research, or like maybe better said, taking stock of climate science. So we need to trust these people, of course. And you see, this is again mapping out risk. It's a risk assessment basically of what the consequences of climate change would be regionally. And you can see the med here. High confidence, of course, in human contribution to the observed change, but as well as increase into hot extremes and exposure to risks related to climate change. So this is not looked at in the short term, but this is looked in the long term. So this is not like last year we had 38 degrees. This is due to climate change. It might be, but this is by looking at a very long term. So this is a fact. We need to protect ourselves in that specific part of Europe. Fourth point, to produce more renewable energy is about happiness. I do like this citation here. This is from an Italian and Armenian actually scientist, Giacomo Ciamician. He used to actually teach in my very birth town, and he published a paper in 1916 on science about photovoltaics. And he said, look, essentially we want to get rid of coal, right? It was very big in the 100 years ago, and said, look, apart from, of course, deploying PV, what we will get if we turn to a civilization which has more PV, more solar photovoltaics, so more renewable energy, we will just get rid of the black and nervous civilization, turning to a generation based or society based on solar energy that would not be harmful to progress and to human happiness. So this is also a social spin to it. So 4 reasons why. So the bottom line of this is we need to decarbonize the economy. We need to produce more energy anyway. We need to find a way to protect ourselves from climate change, also from in the terms of how climate change can impact on our own renewable, on our energy generation. And we want to be happy. How can we do that? Well, we can do that, again, as I mentioned, by shifting the paradigm of how we produce electricity. First, especially electricity. So this is a graph that you can probably check it out yourself. I will, of course, make all the slides available. There are also some very nice interactive tools here. But essentially, you can see from this slide how things is made up. I mean, how the picture is. Normally, what you have now is a system where you have a central plant. It can be a coal plant, it can be a nuclear plant, it can be a gas plant. And then you get the electricity fed right into the grid. And of course, down to factories, down to households, and yeah, and you do your business. What we are shifting to here, however, is a very complex situation where you have, of course, still centralized production. So you still have gas plants, nuclear plants, stuff like that. But you also have, of course, renewable energy generated electricity from wind farms. You have, yeah, you know, the large wind farms, or solar photovoltaic farms, large scale. You have also other means like combined heat and power. So for example, you can have incinerators that can also, by burning waste, they can produce electricity. You have all sorts of things. But what is important here is that, of course, you have a bilateral flow here. So it is not households or factories that only receive electricity, consume electricity, but also, of course, feed electricity back into the grid. And this, of course, is meant to become not only a more sustainable way of producing electricity, because, well, you get rooftop photovoltaics here, so you get renewable energy all over the place, which is not the case here, but also is a mean to ensure energy security. Why? Because if something goes down here, you get a flood, you get a outage. Huh? Of course, you have backup. You have backup from wind farms, you have backup from solar PV, large scale, and you have backup in your very house. This is also why I said this is important from the South European perspective, also in terms of adapting to climate change. This is a sort of adaptation. I see it as a sort of adaptation to the impacts of climate change. Because, okay, climate change is about droughts, it's about floods, but it's also about how this could impact our own system of living, including our energy grid. So if you have problems there, I mean, I've been to South Africa 2 weeks ago, and they normally deal with outages every day. So they just are used of having 2 or 3 hours off the grid. They don't have electricity. And this is related, of course, to their problems with the energy grid. But our energy grid in Europe is rather stable, but this is not necessarily going to be the case in the future. So we want to have a very safety net here. And this is only achievable by decentralizing the energy, the electricity generation system. However, this does not come, let's say, only with advantages. Normally, I will have some green lights here and red lights here to say that, to point out that actually there are advantages and disadvantages that come with that. On the one hand, of course, if you decentralize your energy generation, so you go for the system that I showed you on the right-hand side in the previous slide, what you normally get is more social awareness about how you produce your electricity. Yeah? So if in this room, in some years' time, everybody in this room will just say, look, I generate my own electricity, you will be probably more aware about how the electricity system works, because you are part of it. Secondly, you get more flexibility. You get an outage, you are resilient. Or you can manage better your demand of electricity. Why? Because you master your own electricity. And this is related to the awareness point. Third, minus CO2 emissions, of course, because all the electricity you would generate would normally come from renewable energy sources. At the same time, however, we have disadvantages, which must be weighted off. We could have regulatory failures in how we ensure that the uptake of decentralized electricity generation is carried out. And I will show you an example towards the end of the presentation. So this is a very matter of careful design and effective design of regulation when it comes to master this shift, right? Secondly, you can have rebound effects. So essentially what you're going to get is situations where if we shift to decentralized generation, so we get more and more people like going for rooftop solar, so solar PV on your very roofs, this could impact the way in which they relate to the grid, also in relation to other consumers. Because what you do here is a transition. So you have people that will turn to decentralized energy generation and people who will not. So you will get all the kind of feedback loops in terms of how this massive shift will be carried out. And this eventually will result in potential discrimination between self-generators, so what is called prosumers also. So it means consumers that actually produce their electricity, and normal consumers. This will result also in terms of extra charges that might come to the normal consumers in terms of how the central generator, the normal plant, I don't want to say names because I don't do commercials here, but let's say your regular provider would charge you extra because they get less income out of the regular consumers that are going off the grid, or they are going for their own electricity. So you see that this is a very delicate social and political matter as well. And of course, it needs, when you're talking about a transition, so a process of shifting from point A to point B, of course, whatever stands in between is not a black and white situation. And believe me, this is being explored more and more, not only by legal scholars, but also by sociologists, psychologists even. So this is a topic that is boiling, of course. Why it is boiling? Well, because the EU is believing a lot in this, believes a lot in this shift. It's putting a lot of efforts in this shift. And here comes some policy and legal stuff finally. Well, especially in the last, I would say, 8 years. Yeah, 8 years, 7, 8 years. Starting, of course, with the Green Deal. I'm not going over the Green Deal, of course, but just for you to know, if you don't know it already, that this is a complete overhaul, a complete radical change in how the EU would like to approach environmental and climate objectives. And essentially, the idea is that we want to put our climate objective first on the top of our political agenda. This includes, of course, that one of the main objectives we will be pursuing as the EU is the decarbonization of the economy from all the sectors that I mentioned in one of my first slides. So also from the household sector. And well, you can take a look at yourself later about this slide, because this is basically a snapshot of the most important points that will be adopted, will be touched upon by the Green Deal in the upcoming years, or have already been addressed. And you see clean, reliable, and affordable energy. This is one of the key points here. So we want to ensure that CO2 emissions are reduced. We want to ensure that this is affordable to the people, and we want to ensure that this is reliable. So again, points that come all over again when you talk about decentralized energy generation. There is another policy point here, which is related to the Energy Union. The Energy Union is the policy framework that drives EU action in the energy field since 2015. Again, there is no time, of course, to run through this top to bottom, but what I can say is you have 5 dimensions of that. What is, of course, relevant for us is that we have to decarbonize the economy, and we have to achieve an integrated energy market, which means not only that we have to integrate national energy markets, but we also want to integrate consumers as part of the energy market. So this means that both of us, for example, and all of us in the future should become protagonists, should become part of the energy market. And this is part of the objectives that the EU is pursuing in its own energy policy. At the same time, of course, while reducing CO2 emissions, so going green, going renewable, right? This, legally speaking, has an implication, because this relates to some recent, I would say rather recent obligations that are pending upon member states, including Spain, of course. You've probably heard about the national energy and climate plans. These are plans that are mandated by the European Commission to explain, for the member states to explain how they would achieve these 5 objectives of the Energy Union in practice, in the short to medium to long term. Also, in relation to the policies they want to put in place to pursue those objectives. And one of them in most of the member states, of course, is also related to decentralization of the energy generation. So if you look at all the national energy and climate plans, which I didn't do, of course, but if you look at the Spanish one, you will definitely find a reference to policies, measures, legislative measures to be taken up at the national level to ensure, to enhance, to increase decentralized energy generation. As an asterisk to that, of course, comes the Russian issue. The Russian issue has put quite a spotlight on on the matter of how we get our electricity in the EU. And guess what? We are dependent on Russian gas. Wow, it's been 15 years since we discussed that, right? And how do we get rid of that? Well, there are many ways to do that, and I don't want to explore them now, all of them, of course. But it is definitely a point here. This is taken from the last policy document, which was issued, I think, in March 2022, so very recent, in the middle of the Russian-Ukraine crisis, about, well, one way of getting rid of Russian gas is increasing, of course, renewable energies in the sector where gas is dominant. And guess where gas is very dominant? Heating and the building sector. This is one of them, of course. It's one of the points where it is relevant. But out of those 18-point-something% of greenhouse gas emissions, most of in the residential sector, most of them are related to natural gas in the EU. So bottom line here is we need to shift from gas to renewables at the residential level. And this is not only a matter of decarbonizing the economy, but also a matter of getting energy security. We don't want to depend on Russian gas now. We don't want to depend on American LNG in the future. We don't want to depend on Algerian gas or whatever in the future. We want to be independent. And this is, as you can imagine, a politically, delicate matter. And well, again, this is also related to that. I mean, how do we do that? Of course, we have to accelerate renewables. We have to be more, let's say, effective in terms of how we deal with that administratively, and we need to ensure interconnections across member states. But this is more technical. Yeah, let's say this is as relevant here. But I wanted to make the point that, well, we need to act promptly. How does decentralized energy generation play a role in that picture? I pointed out that on the left-hand side that we have, of course, primary law of the EU involved. We have Article 194, paragraph 2, which is the key norm, the key article here when it comes to energy, Treaty of Functioning of the European Union. This article basically says, look, the European Commission has some competencies in terms of driving the EU energy policy, and we have talked about the energy union, but it cannot really tell member states what to do as far as energy mix is concerned. So the Commission cannot go to Spain and say, look, you have to increase your share of renewable energy, or you have to phase out coal, or you have to phase out gas. This the European Commission cannot really do. So this means that, of course, in that context, subsidiarity plays quite a key role about who is better placed to regulate energy generation. As far as the treaties are concerned so far, it is up to the member states to do that. So again, the consequences of that is that you have essentially 27 different regimes about how you regulate self-generation of electricity. Because of course the Commission cannot possibly do that. What the Commission does, however, is to set some key framework about that. And so you have Article 2 of the Renewable Energy Directive, second, the recast Renewable Energy Directive, and also Article 16 of the Internal Energy Market Directive, which are rather recent, that's been adopted 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, which essentially say this, look, this is what you want to do as a member state when you want to regulate self-generation of electricity. You want to make it accessible to all consumers, including specifically low income and vulnerable households, so people who don't have money to access electricity normally. And therefore you want to set up tools to facilitate access to finance and information. You want to come up with an enabling framework. So you want to get rid of any regulative and administrative barriers as much as possible. You want to avoid discrimination. Back to the point that I said before, this shift should not come at the detriment of some groups, especially if they are vulnerable groups. So people that already have difficulties in paying their bills, very concretely. And also by setting rights and obligations for customers, because if customers become a player in the energy market, then of course this must come not only with rights but also with obligations. And last, of course, the procedures and the tools that you put in place to achieve all this should be fair, proportionate, and transparent. Of course, from an administrative perspective, of course, this is an evidence, and also should be cost reflective, should be based on the market price, should not distort the market, because if you distort the market, then you get discrimination. And then you get probably, most likely, a market failure there. So again, circling back to my point, it is not easy to regulate these things. It is very easy to come up with inefficient solutions that would not benefit anyone or would benefit only anyone, and politically would backfire. So this is the situation generally. What happens in Southern Europe? This is another interesting kind of graph that shows you essentially where the self-generated electricity comes from in all countries in Europe. Of course, I will focus on the southern part of it. So let's say Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, Cyprus over there. You can see that most part of the electricity now comes from solar PV, but this is pretty much the same everywhere, right? And also solar PV that is placed on the roofs and solar PV that is placed on the ground. You might well have it in your very backyard, but you might also have it on your rooftop. You might also have wind turbines, small wind turbines. They can be as high as this sometimes, or you can have it also shared with your neighbors. Both of us, with all the professors at the University of Barcelona, we buy together a wind farm, one or two windmills, and we place it possibly in a place that would not, disturb anyone. And we collect the energy that we produce and we share it among each other. This is also something that is growing and growing in the EU. So to point out that the most important, of course, source of electricity when it comes to self-generation is, of course, solar photovoltaics, at least for the moment. We need to push for solar photovoltaics in Southern Europe, especially. There is a reason for that, of course, because there is so much sun. But this is the case also elsewhere. But this is a key point here, that in Southern Europe, solar PV, solar photovoltaics, is a main driver of self-generation of electricity. And then you get other things, of course. This is the only offshore wind farm. I took this picture myself 10 days ago. Well, no, actually it was last week. This is the only offshore wind farm in the Mediterranean Sea. So these are windmills, you can barely see it. This is placed in the Gulf of Taranto, which is also known for the very large steel factory, maybe you've heard of it, Ilva. But nearby Ilva, we have this, I think it's 6 or 7 windmills. Do you guess how much time it took to get this wind farm taking off from day 1 to from day A to day B? In years. I guess 14. So from the very moment where the producer actually said, look, I want to build this thing, from the moment to the moment where it was actually launched, which was last month, 14 years. We don't have that time. So if you look at the graph that I showed you before, that trajectory down to 2030, we don't have that time. This is another reason why we need to go for these options, these solutions, but also for which is related to the demand, to the offer, to the supply. You decarbonize supply because you get a wind farm that actually produces on large scale electricity. But at the same time, we need to act on demand. So this is, again, the only wind farm that is actually built on the water in the Mediterranean Sea. You get a lot, of course, built on the Northern Sea, for example, which is well placed and well versed for wind energy, but also the Mediterranean Sea is well versed for wind energy. But the problem is, it is just ridiculously difficult to get this taking off. And this is a reality. The European Commission has acknowledged this, but the problem is, this is in the hand of member states. This is in the hand of the Italian government or the Italian local government. And the same for Spain, the same for Portugal, the same for Greece. So what do? You try to complement this with these things, with subsidizing self-generation of electricity, especially through solar PV. What is the main measure that is being adopted to do this? It is called net metering. So basically what happens is, of course, you get the solar panels on your rooftop. The sun produces electricity through the solar panels, which can be very efficient. Now, you have an inverter that turns the DC into AC for your own consumption. But then what happens is that, of course, you can use your energy, but at the same time, you have a bidirectional meter that shifts energy from your house to the grid. Normally, if you consume electricity, your meter would just run onwards. The more you produce, I mean, the more you consume, the farther it gets. But what happens with net metering is that as you have a surplus of energy that you don't use, you will sell it to the grid. So essentially, your meter will start to run backwards. So if the energy you feed into the grid is more than the energy you need to consume, the meter will start running backwards. And therefore, what happens here is that, of course, you put energy into the grid, but at the same time, you also get remunerated for that. You don't do it for free. You're not a charity. You're part of the market, so you're not doing it for free. This is regulated, again, differently in each and every member state. Just to point out that this system here is called net metering, whereas the most widespread one is called net billing. What happens in net metering is essentially you have this very clear bilateral flow. So you have, again, selling electricity, getting electricity when you need, and you compensate that, you offset that. But normally in net metering system, you have a same price. So you sell it at the retail price and you buy it at the retail price. At night when your solar PV doesn't work, you buy electricity and you buy it at a certain price, retail price, and you sell it, when you sell it at the retail price. Normally, however, most of the regulated systems go through net billing, which means that essentially the energy that you feed into the grid, the energy that you're selling, are not sold at the retail price. They are sold at a lower price. So you don't get necessarily a profit out of that. Whereas if you buy electricity, you're always buying at a retail price. This is done. Why is this the case? Essentially because you don't want to get over remuneration for people who actually go for net metering. Remember the point I said before. There is a risk of spillovers in the broader electricity network in relation to other consumers. People can get very rich. So we don't want this to happen. We don't want to have discrimination in the society about that. So I want to welcome you to my backyard. This is my parents' house on the border with Slovenia. You can see also a Google kind of snapshot thing. My parent bought these solar panels here, well, I think it was 20 years ago. He actually also convinced his neighbor to do that as well. So you see the social side of it. I can tell you that in my village, it's about 3,000 people. Now in 20 years, I saw like a ridiculous amount of people installing this. And why did we do that? Well, we did that because it is convenient, depending on the regulatory regime that applies. When my father actually installed these things, of course, this is in Italian, but it got, of course, into the net metering system where it got remunerated for the surplus of energy sold to the grid. This is just a breakdown of how the electricity that was generated over the last few years was used. So you have the red bar, which is the energy that was fed into the grid, so put out of the system. In green is the self-generated and self-consumed electricity, so the one that stayed in the system in my parents' house. And in violet here is the actual amount of electricity that was withdrawn, taken from the grid. So you can see that basically the amount of electricity that was fed into the grid was way relevant, was way high. So what matters here then, from a regulatory perspective, is what is the price that you get for this? So is this a high price? Is it the retail price? Is this higher than the price you pay for this or not? Because if so, you get a surplus. I can tell you, I mean, no secret here, my dad was able to recover all the costs for his investments in 10 years with the lifetime cost of a solar panel for that kind of technology that is about 30 years. So you see that net metering or net bidding schemes can be very remunerative if you do this sharply. So, and this can come again at the detriment of other consumers. So there is a point here that perhaps if we want, we can explore together. So what we did essentially again, in a study that is actually been published some years ago, together with two colleagues at Ascot University, we explored some net metering regimes across Europe, specifically focusing on Greece, Italy, and Cyprus and Flanders. Flanders has its own peculiarities. But I just want to point out that normally, most member states first opt for net bidding just because they don't want to over-remunerate prosumers, so self-generators. Normally, they give you contracts with a fixed price for the selling of electricity that can last different amount of time. In Italy, normally it's 1 year with an automatic renewal. So my dad got this contract, which was renewed for 1 year for 20 years. And in other countries, for example, in Greece, this can last 25 years. So it can be very lock-in. I mean, you get this price for 25 years. It can be very remunerative if the price is right. It depends on how the energy prices go. I mean, how the energy markets actually behaves, right? I would say that to lock in an energy price for self-generators for 25 years is not necessarily market responsive. Then, of course, differences you can find also related to who can actually apply for that. So, for example, Italy opted for a very broad, audience, up to 500 kilowatts. It is quite a lot in terms of power, definitely more than my own dad's solar roof. But then you can also have quite some restricted power, like 10 kilowatts in Flanders. So there are a lot of differences. And of course, it depends on several issues, on several elements, like historically, the maturity of the system, the maturity of the people related to self-generation. If you have a country that is not used to even thinking about self-generation, you want to push for that. So you want to be over-remunerative, perhaps even. If you have countries that have an history of self-generation, renewable energy, social awareness and stuff, maybe you want to be a little bit more conservative. But again, the calibration of the system is not all but an easy exercise. What I want to point out last, however, is that both the European Commission and the Council of the European Energy Regulators, which is the council that includes all the energy regulators nationally in the EU, are pointing out that net metering as such, and also net bidding, should be avoided. They say, look, most of the member states are going for this. Also Spain has chosen to opt for this in 2019. But essentially, the risk here is that what you get is you first allow storage capacity for free to the people, to the consumers, because what they get is, they generate their own electricity. And essentially the grid will work as a storage capacity for them, and they will do it for free. They will get it for free. This is normally something that they will come with a cost, and then you can discriminate. At the same time, consumers' time value sensitivity to volatile energy prices can be put in jeopardy again, because if you have a contract that says, look, you're getting the same price for electricity for 25 years, I mean, again, I'm getting the same price for 25 years. Doesn't even make sense. I mean, if you are going into a world where, you have now 5% of the people who get solar rooftop panels, and in 10 years you get 50% of people, this is going to be a completely different energy market. So this is all but in favor of flexibility in the market, which is something that the Commission actually is telling member states to do. So you see that there is a big, I think, gray area between what the Commission is trying to achieve here when it comes to fostering, when it comes to subsidizing, supporting decentralized energy generation, and what the states are doing. Last, because I'm already late, Spain. Spain enacted a regime in 2019 specifically directed to self-generation. And in doing so, I think that Spain did quite a smart move, also taking stock probably of other experiences, but perhaps you can share some insights with me on that. So essentially, you have a two-track option here. Either you go for net bidding, so the one I said before, you sell electricity, you get a price for that. And essentially it is a rather traditional system with some additional bonus, so to speak, because, for example, savings that you get out of the electricity you produce are not taxable. So this can be a gain. However, you also have limitations about how much you can save, how much capacity you can install, and so on. So you get profitability at first, but total profits, not so good. Unless you can go for the big game, I can go for a direct sell. This is rather unique. So you can go and act as a market player. So you sell your electricity on the market and you're just part of the jungle of the electricity market. So no specific strings attached, but at the same time, well, you have, for example, charges, extra charges for accessing the grid. So for selling to the grid, which is not the case here, we can be rather high. So it can impact your business model in a way. But so you have lower profitability probably in the short term, I'm sorry, but potentially unlimited total profits. I don't really know how this has been working in the last few years, but let's say that this is a shift, I think, in comparison to traditional systems, traditional regulatory systems, towards a more, how to say, true market embedding of consumers, because it gives you the opportunity to really much play a role in the energy market, which again boils down to social awareness, boils down to more, well, even more democratic way in which electricity is generated and sold and negotiated and traded in the European Union. So this is just to give you a snapshot. Of course, I'm open to questions because I think I'm running already late. So this was it as far as self-generation is concerned. It can get way more technical than that, but I will spare you these details. So thanks for your attention. I'm looking forward for questions.
I'm gonna stop sharing now. So yes. Okay. So thank you very much, Professor Fermeglia. That was a brilliant presentation. And yeah, I think that the issues that you addressed in your presentation are not easy, or I mean, I think they're very technical too, but you make it in a very, very clear and pedagogical way. So thank you very much. So now it's time for question, for debate. Let me just also make a small parenthesis here, just to remind the students that you have to sign your names. Okay, there is some kind of a list somewhere here just to get that to sign. So now we just open the debate, and please, if you have a question, okay, the same for those who are online, just please let me know using your hand raise on the screen so I can just get you, well, contributing. Okay, so any question? So let me just start, because just you raised a question when talking about this the wind parks, offshore wind parks. Here we have a kind of debate, and Professor Alex Peñalver probably knows better than me, but we have a yes. So we have a discussion here because, of course, renewable energies at the end of the day, there is something that they need space, that need room, and they need physical places. And here we have a kind of an issue because there is kind of a planet wind park, offshore wind park in the Catalan coast. And there is I would say, big contestation from well, the different citizen movements and all of that. Well, the same as any wind farm is planned in the territory, there is here at least quite an. So that's I mean, how because it's true, as you said, there is different legislation. So there is something that and in fact, the European Commission is quite difficult to, the European Union into general terms has nothing to say about that, or has little to say about that, and there is no ways to get that point dealt with. So I mean, this big contestation, as I think it's a real issue. It's just something that it's happening here. I guess it's happening in the rest of Spain, in other projects, and it probably happens also in Italy or in Greece or whatever, and how to prevent this kind of reactions in terms of there is a need, there is the need to produce that energy, of course, the need to protect the environment, the need to protect some other interests. It's difficult to find the balance.
It is indeed.
Sure.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for that, because actually it brings me back to my very title of the presentation. Huh? I did not choose it for, yeah, I did not choose it by chance. You know, it's only in my backyard because it's meant to reverse the traditional motto, not in my backyard. Huh? This is a true problem with regard to renewable energy generation in the EU, not only in the EU. You know, when I was in Toronto and I was looking at, actually there was a local television with the footage like close up on these huge wind farms, like 20 meters high or even more, like it's huge. Huh? And there were the people like discussing this, and they was like, well, we do like it also because, you know, thanks God, it does not impair the landscape. You know, it's after all, the big debate was not about whether it will deliver renewable energy, but whether it would impact the landscape or not. I can tell you the Gulf of Taranto is beautiful, right? But there has been quite strong opposition about this project precisely for this matter. And this is why also it took quite some time to decide where to place this thing. Eventually they said, look, we have a very ugly steel factory. We can place it in front of this ugly steel factory and nobody will complain. But it took years. And the same probably would be, taking place here, and it is taking place in Belgium as well. So you have all bunch of interests that must be reconciled. At the same time, however, you also want to make sure that the authorization procedures, everything that comes with administrative burden for the developer of these projects are as smooth as possible. And this is a place where the EU can play a role and is trying to stress that. Whether the Repower EU communication that was issued amidst the Russian crisis was precisely about, we need to get these things taking off as soon as possible. We need to get wind farms, we need to get large scale solar PV, we need to get even decentralized small renewable energy installations taking off as soon as possible. We cannot afford to wait that bunch of time that normally takes in every member state. There are, of course, best performers and poor performers, but normally it is just too much time member states take to get this on the ground. And this is also related to reconciling interests. So how do you do that? I think, again, decentralizing is one way to do that, because if you get the benefits of renewable energy in your own pocket, it is always easier to get buy-in. If somebody that actually, if a Chinese company comes to your place and says, look, I want to build a massive wind farms, it's going to be good for the environment, it's going to be good for the climate. And yeah, and then the people that will say, okay, what's in for me? You are the big Chinese guy who actually come here and build up the whole thing, and you get the benefits of this. And what is left out for me? Maybe I can sell you my land. I can get some cheap money for that. But yeah, this is a true discussion that is taking place globally, I would say, also in the EU. And again, it also must be placed in the context where the market for renewable energy is taking larger shares, is scaling up. So you have big players now. It's not like small players who develop their own wind farms. You're talking about big companies doing that. Also Spanish companies. They have quite a big players as well. So you see that as we phase out fossil fuels, you will have another kind of market for renewable energy that will face probably new problems related to NIMBYism, which was not necessarily faced by the whole fossil fuel companies. Who plays a role here? Well, of course, local governments. The EU can provide regulations and provisions about how to ensure public participation in the process. For example, in the environmental impact assessment, you will probably have, of course, you have seen that. Can push for specific arrangements to take place at the member state level to ensure that all the possible interests are duly taken into account. But in the end, it is about local governments making this happen. And it's about being efficient. It's about, well, mainstreaming processes. It's also about changing the mindset of the people, because it's about changing the mindsets of the people who are actually dealing with this full ends. I mean, who are working in the administration. I'm being very, very practical here. But what I can tell you from the Italian experience, you have people actually dealing with large scale or even small scale decentralized energy, renewable energy project that do not know anything about that, because they were, well, probably they're just not used to that. So you need a lot of training, you need to put a lot of efforts in that, because if you change the mindset of the people who are in charge of the decisions, if you change the mindset of the people who are also the decision takers, so they have to somehow, you know, digest the decision, even if they are not okay with that, then we can get a full, let's say, full-fledged like boost of that. Otherwise, it will always end up to someone opposing, someone being not fully okay with that, and you don't get the timing that you need again. And you go back to the 14 years as above, which is not the case, however, if you go for rooftop solar panels. This you can get right away. Thanks for this question, because again, I can talk about law a lot. But one thing is the law that is on paper, numbers, articles, regimes, policy goals, but then come these things. What you can do, if you like, there is no secret again, I can show you the turnover of my dad's solar photovoltaics. It did, I mean, we did not get rich with that. So just don't overpromise, okay? But you can say, look, if you do this, it makes sense economically, and it makes sense, of course, environmentally. Yeah? I can say that, well, if you engage in a similar conversation with the 20 years old guy, you will probably look at it from the reverse perspective. You say, first, look, this is environmentally good for you and your children and everyone on this planet, and plus you make money, maybe, if you're smart enough. With other generations, I understand that probably the narrative, which is about literally one-to-one discussion, is probably going to be reversed, because, well, people will say, why do I have to change my habits? What's in for me again? And there is a lot to actually to gain for that. I did not have time to delve into the whole kind of things that come attached with the installation of solar panels, because you can get very much efficient in how you manage your energy. You probably heard about smart meters, so that actually manage the very generation of your energy and adapts your generation of electricity to your needs, to the energy prices. It can be very much price responsive. So, for example, it kind of allows you to buy electricity when the price is low and sell electricity when the price is high. You can do a lot of things, and it's not going to be too much costly. Again, the thing is now, of course, member states have, governments have realized that costs for especially solar PV is sinking, right? You have had some problems here as well in Spain with this, with your tariffication of renewable energy, not talking about small installations, but for large installations because of that. Now, to buy a solar panel, well, some solar panels, just like my father did 20 years ago, is not the same now. The costs are just like the half or even less. So governments have realized, look, we want to do this, we want to subsidize renewable energy, but we want to do it right, and we don't want to over remunerate. Again, people don't have to make windfall profits out of that. So how to engage with this discussion? Well, you might want to make the point that there is a need to first being energy independent, And this can be done probably in the short term, in the near future, more and more, thanks to the advancement that we are getting with the batteries, with the storage technologies. Now my father is thinking of installing a large battery in his backyard. This would allow him to store the electricity he produces and then use it at night or even the day after. So he can become even completely independent from the grid. He doesn't have to buy any electricity. So that, if you remember the chart, that bar, I think it was a violet bar, would just go more or less down to zero. So there is the whole sense in the world to invest a little bit of money, and then there comes also the environmental and social discussion about saying, look, this is good for young generations. This is rather ethical discussion, but this is also something that must be addressed, I think. This is a part of the Green Deal is also about that. It's about establishing a social pact between different generations. What the decisions that will be taken now by all the generations about how they produce their electricity or how they get their electricity is going to impact on you, on me as well, on your children, and so on. So I think that there is also, I thank you for this question, because I think this is exactly the kind of discussion we want to have in a frank way, and decentralized and being more aware of about how we generate electricity is part of this social transformation. Because if you understand that we have to get rid of our past habits, our past system, this is a massive shift. And that will prompt, I think, cascade effects. So again, first go after the money and then say, look, this is also good for the environment. maybe this could be very effective.
I'm actually working on a final lottery on windmills. And one of my biggest concerns is not just about the effects of the landscape, but the huge amount of materials we're going to need to create and build all these new.
Well, it can lead us very far. What I can tell is that, of course, the EU is aware of that. And again, talking to the Green Deal also has a, let's say, side of it that it relates to how the EU will be getting its raw materials. You want to get more solar PV panels, you want to get more batteries, you need more raw materials. As simple as that. You need more cobalt, you need more lithium. I mean, there's no way around it. And this, of course, comes with heavy political lift. Who owns cobalt? Cobalt is a real thing. It's in the ground. I mean, you have to mine it. It's not coming from the trees, right? Not yet, at least. So someone has to provide these things in a very massive amount and increasingly higher. At the same discussion for electric cars. What the EU is trying to do, however, is to trace the whole supply chain of these things and also adopt a life cycle perspective. So I'm very interested in this point from a research perspective, because again, it is not all gold what glitters. Even with wind farms, from the perspective you mentioned, so the intensity of generating a wind farm in certain places can be even not convenient from several perspectives. From the perspective of the energy intensity of the process, how much energy you need to produce the same amount of electricity from that wind field, from the wind farms. It might take quite a lot if you look at the whole process. So you want to be careful also in how you, how you select different projects, for example, because you have to look at the whole impact that this shift will have from a raw materials perspective, from an energy intensity perspective, so from the input output of energy, for example, because this means more CO2. And this can also have impact in terms of, social and political impacts, of course. We need to be prepared because, again, lithium, cobalt, raw materials are located somewhere that is not necessarily very stable countries. And there are countries that not by chance, for example, China is well, is putting a lot of, let's say, interest on lately. I'm just dropping this. Again, nothing happens by chance. So there is this trend, which has to be very carefully addressed. And the EU is trying to do that, essentially by adopting, again, value chain analysis. What is the impact of the whole value chain that you are adopting to get these materials or to get this product done, including wind farms or solar PV panels, and also looking at the life cycle assessment. So if I want to install a large-scale solar PV installation, what is the total amount of CO2 emissions that I'm going to produce from the moment where I get my solar panels done, or even from the moment where I extract my raw materials to get the solar panels done, to the moment where I decommission the solar panel. So a solar panel is gone, doesn't produce anymore. What do I do about it? I got a lot of lithium. Well, what do I do about it? Or silicium, what do I do about it? You have to recycle it. So, of course, you see it now, this circle back to a whole other branch of policy, which is about the circular economy plan or circular economy approach, where you say, look, if you have the solar panel, you want to get rid of it. Of course, you want to recycle as much as possible. Everything should stay in the economy and hopefully spark a true circularity approach. So this is what the EU is trying to do, because it's aware that, yeah, raw materials are going to become an issue more and more as wind, solar PV are increasing and electric cars are increasing in terms of the use. Remember, the EU has set itself, I think it's 2035, it's still there. We should only get electric cars in the EU. No more, well, traditional engine cars in 2035. It's in 13 years, it's the day after tomorrow. Huh? So how do we get that? Well, this is a big question again, but this, and then you have a whole bunch of opinions about that. Huh? And I don't want to venture into that discussion because it can take us very far, but you have a point. So if you are interested for your thesis, of course, there are a whole bunch of policy documents that actually say what the EU position is about this and what the member state position should be as well.
Thank you. German?
Of course, there is a mismatch. Huh? I won't like you to be critical about this because, again, I don't have any silver bullet, any neat answer to all these major questions that your colleague just raised. I think it is something that everybody has to make his or her own mind about a bit. Huh? And hopefully everybody in the medium term to long term will come up with a similar thinking about what we should be doing. But again, there is no black and white answer. What I can say is I got to talk with a guy who actually worked at IPCC, huh? So Nobel Prize winner as part of the IPCC, so kind of smart guy. And he said, look, well, if we invested, I think the total amount of growth of GDP we have for 1 year globally, normally I think the world grows at a rate of 2% GDP globally. Huh? If we invested this money into everything that is needed to get carbon neutral, let's say, or at least to stay within the famous Paris Agreement objective, 1.5 degrees, well below 1.5 degrees, we only needed that. We only needed 1 year of no growth. Let's say, speaking in numbers. So if you put all the money, if we say all together, every country in the world, we don't grow, we don't get any GDP growth for 1 year, we will probably have enough resources to address the climate crisis in a proper, consistent way. Of course, provided that we do that properly. But in terms, I mean, my message here is that, well, we need to rethink, of course, of the way we see our society growing in the future. Because, well, you cannot possibly satisfy that amount of energy that I showed you before with the current system. It is simply not possible. Or it is possible, but we want to go for the path that we have explored for the last 150 years. Result of that is we get a +4, +5 degrees Celsius average temperature. We enter in muddy waters. Well, okay, I can build my own bunker and well, be prepared. So this is precisely the conversation we want to have. And again, there is no how to say win-win situation anyway, because I must be frank, this is an uncomfortable message I'm sending, and I don't want to be how to say pessimistic here. But again, even if we go for the path that IPCC is suggesting and everybody's suggesting, you know, large-scale renewable energy, this is not going to come at a very net cost. I mean, we're going to have some cost in terms of how we exploit our resources, because we have limited resources on this planet. So even with renewable energies, of course, we will have to exploit resources in our planet in a large scale, at a large scale. So again, some costs are attached in terms of further exploitation, in terms of violation of human rights, in terms of, well, geopolitical shifts, in terms of wars. Something is attached. So we're not going into a super shiny future, even if we go for renewable energy. So I want to be very clear on that. But of course, it's going to be better in terms of CO2 as concentration that the future we are heading to. I did not dare to show you the graph that is out there in several places that show you where we should be heading according to the Paris Agreement and where we are heading. I'm not going to show you that because simply would probably just, yeah, I mean, would just not make you feel optimistic about the future. So yeah, this is again, thanks for this question, because I think university is precisely the place where you want to have this discussion across generations as well, and also within generation about what we're going to do about the future. And yeah, I just try to picture one part of the puzzle, but it's, of course, is, well, as big as the whole society is. So it's well more complicated than that, of course. But thanks for the question.
Any other, Alex? Yes, just one question. What is your opinion about the Commission delegate regulation about nuclear energy and gas energy as a environmental framework? In this context.
Right. I don't know if I have to put this into context, maybe. Just for you to know, well, among other things that the EU has been doing within the Green Deal is a regulation that essentially says, look, certain activities contribute to the EU's environmental and climate objectives. So certain activities are good. I'm very much oversimplifying, and certain activities are bad. Coal is bad. So if you invest in coal, you are probably not going to get anything done in the European Union. I'm very much putting it a 5 years old kind of, or like grandma, grandpa kind of thing. But if you ever had to explain this to your grandpa or grandma, this is how you want to put it. If you are investing in renewable energy, this is good, because this, of course, contributes to our net zero targets, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. There are, of course, gray areas when it comes to energy generation, especially two: natural gas and nuclear power. I tried, if you remember the slide I showed you before, like the energy mix, we still have quite a lot of generation in the EU from nuclear power, and quite, of course, a lot of generation from natural gas. Setting aside the Russian imports thing, let's set this aside for a while. What the Commission has actually said in this delegated regulation that implements the actual so-called EU taxonomy, so the legislation that said this is good, this is bad, he said eventually, well, nuclear power and gas and natural gas are good. I'm again oversimplifying. So they are activities that are aimed under certain conditions to contribute to the EU Green Deal objective. So if I am a big investor and want to build a nuclear power plant in Europe, let's say that I have the green light under certain conditions by the Commission to do that, because this is deemed to be good for the climate objectives. This is all but, I mean, this is totally controversial. There are political points attached to that. I think. In fact, I think Germany is going to challenge that. This is the latest news I had. Germany is going to challenge this decision by the Commission. There is also a democracy point of view here. Who is the Commission to say whether the nuclear power or gas power is actually good or bad for the environment of all European citizens? They have done it by the delegated regulation. So there's not been, I mean, there's been a discussion in the parliament, of course, about that. And you can imagine that some parties were, well, the Green parties were not very happy about, having an EU paper saying natural gas is good for the environment. Really? I mean, natural gas. Natural gas is, of course, better than coal in terms of CO2 emissions. But what you get is, of course, CH4 emissions, methane emissions, and you get all sort of, well, potential other detrimental health impacts that come with that. So, and nuclear power is, of course, a big deal because, well, out of that share of nuclear energy, I would say that 80 to 85% is generated in France. France has now more than 50 nuclear reactors running right now. Most of them need maintenance, by the way, which is quite a concern from a safety perspective. As far as I know, maybe there is only one nuclear power plant being constructed now in Europe. I think it's Hinkley Point in the oh, well, it's the UK, so not you anymore. I don't really know about nuclear power plants being constructed right now, being built in Europe, in continental Europe. I know there is one just launched in Finland. I know Italy is having this discussion because Italy is discussing about, well, we have a lot of renewable energy, but we cannot possibly shift. We cannot possibly replace coal. We cannot possibly replace gas only with renewable energy. What do we do? Should we go for nuclear energy? It's the only way, the only available option. Yes, but then the point is, we had a referendum 30 years ago, and the people said we don't want to have nuclear anymore. And then you have, of course, people saying, look, yeah, but this referendum was very old. We need to reboot that. But then my point is, you know how it takes to build a nuclear power reactor? Roughly, the last nuclear power reactor that was built in Finland took, again, I think 14 years from the very design to the very launch, to the very how to say, yeah, for the very launch, let's say, for the very first day of generation. It is just too much time. We don't have that time. I mean, it's as simple as that. We don't have that time. And the problem with that discussion is that you are shifting the attention from the real priority that is, again, from an energy perspective and from the supply perspective, is the renewable energy. It is very easy to say, look, we need to do natural gas. We need to do, well, nuclear power is also good. You shift investments there. And then what you do is you lock in other technologies. This is my take. This is like, I don't know the proper words in English, but we have a word in Italian, which is actually specchietto per l'odore, which means you do something to divert the discussion. The real discussion is we need to upscale renewable energy as soon as possible. All kinds of it: wind, solar, hydropower where possible. Explore other ways. Offshore wind power, huge potential without the time frame. We need to do that. And I think it is, well, that position that the Commission took was, of course, a political compromise, because there were member states that were pushing for inclusion of nuclear energy. There were countries that were against. Ultimately, the Commission had to make a choice. I think it was a poor compromise. I'm not afraid of saying that. And I think it's in a way contradictory, because again, on the one hand, you claim that renewable energy must be your priority, but on the other hand, you actually say that especially natural gas is going to be one of the key technologies, which is not the case. It's not the case in the long term. It can be the case in the short term, but again, what you see is now in Italy, we have, I think, a dozen at least of new nuclear gas plants being built. And again, if you build a nuclear gas plant now, well, as an investor, you expect to make profits out of it for the next 20, 30 years. I mean, I put money, I want money. Nobody is charity here. You expect a return on your investment. And again, this is not compatible with the time frame that we have. it is just not right. I mean, you cannot, as a government, step in then after 10 years and say, look, yeah, I'm just done with natural gas because, yeah, we need to go full renewable. You have problems there. And this opens a whole new debate about how to deal with investments that are being made now in the energy sector with the long-term perspective, how you want to regulate that. So again, probably to respond to your question, I'm not okay with the solution that the European Commission has come up with. I do understand that this was a political compromise because there were member states striving for different positions. And I do believe that there will be further discussions about, especially nuclear power. Natural gas, still, we will see about the Russian situation here, how this evolves. But I think with nuclear power, there's going to be a huge discussion locally, I mean, member states and also the EU level. But frankly, I think it is quite contradictory. I'm joining that team that actually is quite, not concerned, but surprised to say, quite surprised. Yeah, so, yeah, but again, this thing opens a whole new discussion, which I don't want to talk about because otherwise, yeah, I talk just too much.
Any other last questions? Because we are just on our time. Well, if there is no more questions, no last question, no? Okay, then if there is no more questions, we will just thanks again, Professor Fermeglia, for your presentations and also for your answers and for this discussion. I think that you learned a lot today. And so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Checking that there is no question here. Yeah, no more questions here. So let me just